Oh, wow. I'm being amplified. Can you actually hear me? Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. That's quite beautiful. Especially thank you to you, Joel, for joining us tonight. So let's start by a few questions to the crowd. First, who knows Joel?
Wait. 1, 2, 3.
Come on. Who has used Stack Overflow? Yep.
A couple of people are using it. That's good. That's good. I see a bright future for Stack Overflow.
Who has ever answered questions on Stack Overflow? People are
Thank you.
All right. So just to give you like a brief overview of this session, we're going to start by Fireside Chat. So we have the Fireside.
It's actually warm. I can't see that back
for 45 minutes, and so we will talk about your past, present, and future as serial entrepreneur, and also about the developer industry in general, and what lessons we can share with us today. After those 45 minutes, we are going to open like a Q&A session. So we have a microphone over there, and I'll ask you to ask your questions on the microphone over there. All right. So maybe you want to say a few words about yourself. I mean,
sure.
I don't think we should really introduce you so long, but
everybody has to know who I am, right? I've been working on developer stuff for a really long time after noticing that developers didn't get any respect a long time ago. And also, the other thing I noticed is that the world didn't really know, or most people working as software developers didn't know all the best ways of doing things that had already been figured out at places like Microsoft. When I was working at Microsoft, I saw that they knew how to do everything. And I was surprised that even 5 years after I left Microsoft, I looked around and nobody knew basic things. They didn't have a bug database. They didn't know how to use version control. They hired programmers without evaluating whether or not they knew how to write code. And so I started writing Joel on software, and it was just very easy, kind of like, let me just dump what's in my brain about programming out to the world. And everybody said, wow, this never occurred to us.
And you started in 2000, which is
2000.
Like super early for like the blog.
It was a very early blog, yeah. And in fact, I think I used editthispage.com for Joel on software, which some of you may remember as being probably the first platform for blogging. Came out about the same time as Blogger, maybe a little bit earlier.
How did that influence, how did your blog actually influence your business? Because you also started Fog Creek.
Yeah, at about the same time, pretty much. I think I started writing the blog a few months before I started Fog Creek, when I was already planning to start Fog Creek. And it influenced it quite a bit because Fog Creek was a bootstrap company. I had no money getting started. I had no idea. I had no invention. And I just wanted to make a great place for programmers to work, but I really didn't have the resources to build anything. And so creating the blog gave me a little bit of a platform where sort of a few people read it, and a little bit of my own kind of free marketing for our products. For, a lot of people. Has anybody used FogBugs? Do any of you remember FogBugs? A few people. It's still, you can still buy it, by the way. If the rest of you, if you like Stack Overflow, you'll love FogBugs. We started selling that in 2001. And just having a tiny audience from my blog in those days was enough to make some revenue selling this product, and we wouldn't have had anything else like that.
So I've read today that you've written 1,114 articles in 16 years.
Yeah, they're probably not very good, but there's at least 10 good ones in there, I think, that I'm still proud of.
So my question is, I also, probably a lot of people here started a blog at some point. And it's just really hard to keep on going, and especially at the beginning where it's hard to get traction. How did you manage to get going and write an article every week or so? I guess more than every week actually.
Yeah, what I was doing then, I would say at the time that I was really productive, the best thing that I could do to write an article would be to explain something to a friend or a coworker. and I would suddenly find myself, oh wow, I just gave a little speech to a coworker, and I would say, wait a minute, let me go write that down. That was usually the best way to do it. And I was lucky enough to have some good friends who, no matter what I wanted to talk about, would sit there and say, that's very interesting, Joel. They sort of humored me, and that allowed me to give my grandiose speeches to them. And then I would say, wait a minute, I should write that down and get blog points. So a lot of it started from that.
Okay.
Like really, once I kind of owned the material, it was very easy to write. And I never tried to write something that felt like homework or felt like a research project.
Right.
It had to be something that was inside me,
Yeah.
kind of exploding onto the page.
That makes sense. So you've done something that I think a lot of us dreamed about, like going from being like a developer to a serial entrepreneur. So what advice would you share with people in this room about, starting their own business and
Well, first of all, it's not mandatory to start your own business. It's not required. And I only started Fog Creek because I had just spent the previous 5 years just trying to find a decent place to work as a programmer in New York City and not wanting to leave the city for social and personal reasons, and really wanting a place that respected programmers and did real software product development, and I just couldn't find it, and so I had no choice but to start Fog Creek. And similarly, I started Stack Overflow with Jeff Atwood because of, you probably all remember Experts Exchange, and we just had to put them out of business. This was required for the universe to
That's a good motivation.
delete that site, and Trello also was sort of like the thing had to be out there in the world. I couldn't figure out what my team was working on, and I thought there's got to be an easier way. Just look around this office. Look how many places there are Post-it notes arranged in columns, and every one of those is a Trello board. If you don't have the motivation to make something exist in the world, then don't bother. Like that's the minimum amount of motivation you need. I think the entrepreneurs I see not being successful are the ones that want to start a business, they don't care what. Like, I just want to be a business guy. I don't have any desire for anything to exist in the world. I don't have a strong motivation. Or the people that are just doing it for money, for mercenary purposes, eventually. Some of them succeed, but the ones that are really successful are doing it because the thing needs to exist in the world.
Basically like you scratch an itch, right?
Yeah, it's more than scratching an itch almost. It's like this It's chopping off an extra arm. I don't know. It's like it's a much larger. I mean, because you need a couple of years of energy usually to create these things.
I see. So we hear a lot about resiliency in the entrepreneurship world.
Yeah.
What could you tell us about that? Like, do you think that's the one quality entrepreneur needs, or how would you?
Yeah, like resilience or persistence, or keep trying no matter how hard. That's actually kind of a tough one, and the best definition I heard is because it's not always the right thing to do. And in fact, when I see entrepreneurs that are continuing to try to build the same business for 3 years, and they've tried it and they built it and they showed it, and the world came and the world was not impressed, and the world did not want that thing that they built. And it wasn't that there was anything wrong with it, it's that their idea of what was missing in the world was when tested was incorrect, and at that point resilience is just a waste of time. At that point it's a quixotic experience, or as they say, tilting at windmills.
But then when do you know when to stop, basically?
When do you know when to stop? Or when do you know when to start? On the other hand, I do want to say that building a business is very hard. So the best description I've heard, I wish I could remember who to give credit to, so I'll just take the credit for this. Might have been Sam Altman, who said, what you need is resilience when you're being successful. Like the best entrepreneurs, it's hard because you are succeeding. It's not hard because you're failing. It should be hard because you're succeeding. Right. It should be, I have 47 customer emails to answer today, and it's hard because I have to stay up until 11 p.m. answering 47 customer emails. It shouldn't be, it's hard because I cannot figure out how to get any customer to even look at this thing and then email me.
Yeah. So I guess we can describe entrepreneurship a bit like a roller coaster, right? There's a lot of ups and downs. What are your biggest ups and downs?
Biggest ups and downs. Actually, you warned me about this question
and
before,
what you
so I
learned
should
from them as well.
Prepared. There have been quite a few. I mean, the truth is, at Fog Creek, the idea was to keep trying new products And we thought that we were bootstrapping, so we thought, all right, FogBug's some code that we have sitting around. Let's sell it to anybody that wants it. Let's just package it in a zip file and just see if we can get people to pay us. And a couple of people did, so thank you. And but it was bug tracking software. We didn't think it was the be all and end all, and so we tried a lot of other things. CityDesk was the second thing. It was a blog publishing platform that ran on Windows 95. I can't even, like, now it's like a joke. Why would you make a blog publishing platform that runs on a desktop operating system? But we thought that was the whole cool thing, and it turned out not to be useful. But there was sort of this idea of every single year we'll try a new thing, and we'll try sort of different things, and we'll continue to build on those successes. And there were a lot of experiments that didn't work so well, and a few things that really did take off. I mean, FogBugs really was very successful. To this day, it's just like a money-generating machine. And Stack Overflow was obviously pretty successful. Every programmer uses it. Trello is growing at an incredible rate. It's adding 150,000 users a day. I'm very optimistic about HyperDev. It's probably too early to tell. It's only been in beta for a couple of weeks.
I will have questions about that.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. But there are some other things that I shipped that were just complete disasters and utterly terrible, some of which I just didn't even pay very much attention to. We had a thing called WebPutty a few years ago, which in some ways is like a very early kind of hyperdev type thing, but only for CSS. Okay. And that wasn't enough, and it wasn't interesting. We had some successes that were, you talk about failures, mitigated failures, successes, and then there's sort of some mitigated successes where it was like, the worst thing, it's great when something is hugely successful. Stack Overflow, FogBugs, Trello, huge successes, that's great. I mean, it's hard, but it's great. It's great when something is a complete failure, because you can say, tomorrow, WebPutty will be shut down. Yep. It is no more. I'm sorry. And you get one email from a sad person. And I'm sorry, but that's only one. Because nobody wanted this thing that we made. And also, you feel kind of good about that. It's like, I don't have to work on that anymore, thank God. The problem is something that gets like a little bit of success. People buy it, they want to use it, they start using it, they like it, but it's never going to really be big. It's just a little niche, narrow thing. In our case, that's Kiln, which was this mercurial version control kind of thing. We've since adapted it to be Git version control. It's still a nice version control package, but at this point, it has just enough customers that we have to keep working on it and keep maintaining it. It's stuck in the middle. But it's sort of stuck. It's never going to be GitHub. It's not even close to being GitHub.
I see.
And the customers are paying us good money, and they're well worth the effort, and we're going to continue to work on it as long as we have some customers. But the stuck in the middle is really one of the harder
Yeah, I've heard that quite
domains.
a few times. Also because like investors don't really want to put more money if there's like some investors. And
they sort of say, this doesn't, like the growth is not there anymore. Exactly, you've plateaued.
Yeah.
Not so exciting.
So I actually just created a meetup about failure. And it's quite interesting because I spent some time in San Francisco, and like the culture about failure is really different. In the US and here, for example, in Germany.
That's true. Germany is probably the opposite extreme of the US in terms of the. Although there is a good startup community here, a little bit more
Definitely,
in Berlin.
Yeah, totally. What is your biggest software fail, like as a developer or as like an entrepreneur?
Everything really. I mean, pretty much what is it? I do want to take credit of probably the most noteworthy thing is I had a summer intern that said, hey, you should run job listings on Joel Software. And that turned out to be an unbelievably good idea. It came from a summer intern that within a year had made us $1 million in revenue from job listings on Joel Software. And over the years, that sort of inspired how Stack Overflow makes money, not just through job listings, but also candidate search and all these other features. And has led to Stack Overflow being a business with 280 employees and it's around the world, and it gets 100 million. And it's like that idea. That was sort of the genesis of how we could make money for Stack Overflow. That was the opposite of the Experts Exchange way of doing things. So that was a great idea, not mine. Jobs on Joel Software. I am a genius for listening to our summer intern and actually believing him. And I'm also a genius because his code that he wrote was terrible, so I had to rewrite it. But 2 months later, I thought, for every programmer in the United States, there are 10 programmers in India, aren't there? So I should make a job listing service for India. It would just be jobs.joelsoftware.co.in or whatever.
Yep.
And that's going to be huge, and we'll charge 25 rupees, or I didn't know how much a rupee was, but I thought the prices had to be lower because it's India. And I worked on that for about a week, and I adjusted the database and added every friggin' table got a new column, which was country. And we had to implement all this currency stuff, and I had to find somebody to accept payments in India, and you had to get a domain in India, which was not easy. And eventually finished all that stuff and got a total of 1 job listing on that job board ever for a net revenue of 25 rupees. And I don't know why that was. Maybe if I'd kept working on it. I mean, there was one person in India who was nice enough to send me a 38-page email of why this would never work. But I get those every day. I get that for Trello and Stack Overflow too, so I didn't really believe it. But that was nice. Eventually we gave up on that too. But that was probably the most absolutely astonishingly complete failure.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So let's focus a bit about like the present. So Stack Overflow is part of Stack Exchange.
Yeah.
Right?
We have trouble with names. Now it's just Stack Overflow. Stack Exchange is the network of 150 sites on different subjects.
Okay. So what kind of trends do you see in these networks of like Q&A sites?
Well, one of the things for a long time, we did a little bit of a pivot, and I'm going to use the word pivot to mean what it originally meant, which is where you keep everything the same and you just change one little thing and everything works better, not in the current contemporary version of pivot, which is like we utterly failed, but we want to keep the money that we got from the VCs for the next thing. This was like there was a genuine pivot there with Stack Exchange, where essentially we said we want to continue to support questions on every possible topic, but the pivot was that we realized that Stack Exchange was mostly serving developers, actually, that were coming to Stack Exchange to talk about other things, and that the focus of the business was really going to swerve from being anybody with a question of any sort to really serving developers and keeping the Stack Exchange network almost like as I guess in geography you would call it a catchment area, right? Like it's the area around your city. You've got a bunch of little villages and a bunch of farms that support the city, and the city is what's important. And that was our vision for Stack Overflow, is the city in the middle, and Stack Exchange is what keeps it healthy by surrounding it a little bit.
All right. What community have a lot of traction right now?
Well, and when I tell you the answer to this, you'll actually see why we did this pivot. They're mostly related to programming things, and the communities that are growing the fastest are Stack Overflow in Russian, Stack Overflow in Portuguese, Stack Overflow in Spanish, etc. And then the other group of things that are growing very, very quickly are in the area of mathematics, where we sort of dominate the world of mathematics, and there's several sites, if you include Math Overflow, Math Stack Exchange, Tech and LaTeX, theoretical computer science, and the other math-related fields, physics, where we're really strong. And then there's a lot of stuff kind of in the periphery of programming, and then there's a lot of stuff like photography and parenting, which is usually programmers talk about cameras, programmers talk about parenting, programmers talk about beer. That said, we have a lot of traction from the world at large, even though for the most part, the participation on Stack Exchange is 50% programmers, people that came from Stack Overflow. But the page views come from all over the internet, because then we make these amazing pages. And so Stack Overflow has 45 million unique visitors a month. Stack Exchange collectively has more than 100 million. Wow. So most of the people that visit a Stack Exchange page are not programmers.
Great. Is Quora a threat to you, or like how do they compare? Like,
it's useful to have people with a lot of money that they made from being a Facebook founder competing against you, because sometimes you need to rally the troops, and so you need a hypothetical enemy, even if there are no real enemies. So we can make fun of Quora a little bit. So first of all, like the real answer to Quora is I think they're doing something different than what we're doing, and they're doing it with a slightly different strategy. My perception of Quora, and I'm not super active there, is that it's more provoked blogging. In other words, the question is there, but the question is there in order to provoke somebody to write an essay that looks a lot like a blog. It could be an opinion piece. Yep. It could be a page long. It's not expected to be well researched. It's not expected. It's very different than Stack Overflow, where it's like, I have this problem. How do I solve it? Here are 4 possible answers. Please tell us which one worked. And that's enough of a different thing that I don't think there's any competition. It's very rare to see real Stack Overflow style Q&A happening on Quora. They also don't have revenue, so that's another difference.
That is a big difference.
in my humble opinion. And there's some other differences that I think are just, I don't even want to say philosophical differences, but there's a question of how you get quality in a Q&A site, because if you look at the world of questions and answers, you discover Yahoo Answers, Answers.com, a lot of these other absolutely hilarious sites, which they look like they have, they're hilarious because they look like they have terrible answers, and sometimes even terrible questions. How come my hand shakes when I eat dirt? That's like a legit, that comes up a lot. And then it's like, don't eat dirt. That's the answer. And then there's another answer that's like, shut up, I didn't ask you if I should eat dirt or not. I said, how come my hand shakes when I eat? This is one of the things that somebody finally told me, when we were raising money for Stack Overflow, I went and met with a lot of venture capitalists, and an enormous number of venture capitalists, as it turned out, used to be the product manager in charge of Yahoo Answers. Because I guess that was sort of a revolving door of Silicon Valley mid-level executives that eventually became VCs. One of them finally told me, what we discovered, and we were very sad, we couldn't tell anybody, but what had happened with Yahoo Answers is it turned into a teenage chat room for latchkey children, usually girls, mid-teens, that used to have a MySpace page, and that was the MySpace era, and the trouble is on MySpace there were creeps that would bother them, and so they instead of participating on MySpace where they have a permanent profile, and an almost real identity, but at least it's a permanent profile. You can't just disappear. On Yahoo Answers, you could sort of come in with a new account every single day. You would chat, that you didn't have and so it just became a chat room for kids to entertain themselves. And so it generated a very different form of Q&A. That the byproduct of that was useless. So the SEO was worthless. And everybody that's been involved in Q&A has sort of had the quality question as the central question of like, what can we do to not become Yahoo Answers? How do we not descend down that trap? And we had a very clear strategy at Stack Overflow that was really complicated and has a lot of moving parts. So one of the moving parts is that in Stack Overflow, moderation must come from the community. It can't be imposed from above. And it has to come from the community because we're going to have so much activity that everybody has to see everything around them and pick up all the garbage that they see. And we built a system of reputation and points and all that kind of stuff to create the moderation from community that we have on Stack Overflow. And that's just one part of the quality equation on Stack Overflow. Another part is not allowing opinion-based questions because, oddly enough, we discovered that questions of which there is no true or false answer do not lead to quality pages. And you could debate that for a long time, but eventually I would win. But we don't care because we did it on Stack Overflow and it worked, so yay us. In the meantime, I think Quora, the founders of Quora came from Facebook, and they had this philosophy that if we require people to use their actual name, you'll get higher quality because they have some ownership over what is said in their name. And I think that did improve the quality on Quora somewhat, but it also discouraged the participation because a lot of people want to be pseudonymous or actually not use their real identity on the net. We see about 2/3 of our users contribute because they want to help somebody, and if you literally ask them, they would say, I would not contribute if I had to use my real identity. I'm only willing to do it under these conditions. And so Quora gives up 2/3 of all potential answers, and that makes it very hard for them to get narrow answers from a particular person that happens to know the answer. So we both, another difference I think is that we had a different approach to how we're going to get quality.
Good. Back to software development, what kind of trends in terms of adoption do you see in the software development world?
You mean like new things that are coming out, or just
things that are getting like a lot of traction lately, for example?
Yeah, well, hyperdev is absolutely amazing. No, we actually have, and I'm kind of not an expert on this, but there are a lot of statistics that come out of Stack Overflow where you can sort of see like React is blowing up and things like that. And The data is all online based on Stack Overflow usage, and it's very easy just to do very simple queries. By the way, not many people know this. I just want to tell you, we have a site called data.stackexchange.com, and you can go to that site and type SQL queries against our database, and we'll run them for you. And so if you want to do any kind of query on the Stack Overflow data set that's interesting, you can either download our entire SQL Server data set from BitTorrent, or you can go to that site and just type queries, and you can do things over time, and it'll make little graphs, and it's an amazing site. So it's very easy to get this data out of our data set.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so I won't go into too much about that. I can sort of talk about, there is one long-term trend that I've seen in programming, because I'm old, and I've been programming since... Anyway, I have used punched cards.
Oh, wow. Yes.
Yeah. And CRTs were an innovation. I used to use teletypes where you typed and it printed. And I think the biggest change I've seen is a change in the levels of abstraction. We moved to a much higher level of abstraction. Right. And like all abstractions, it's leaky, which is important, and that doesn't make sense to you, then you haven't read enough of my blog. And that means that you're using these higher and higher level abstractions to give you much better tools, but if it doesn't do exactly what you want, you're often at a loss for how to proceed. And the way I describe this, if you ever have to explain this to a programmer, it's fairly simple. It's like, remember, we used to write assembly, we used to write C code, you had I/O, the input and output was files and the TTY. Today, if you're an Amazon programmer, one of your output devices is a warehouse worker.
Right.
As an output device, you can cause a warehouse worker to go take a box from a shelf and put it in a box. And that is a thing that is an literally output device. And so that's a much higher level of abstraction than we ever had anything even remotely like that in the old days. But it's leaky because the warehouse worker might not be tall enough to reach the top shelf, and then you have to remember to call this other function to check the height of the warehouse worker. I'm not joking, it's a real thing, to make sure that they can reach the shelf that you're asking them to go climb up on. And that's an example of these crazy abstract things that you can call, and then they leak in a funny way. And the way you explain this to non-programmers, you can tell them about Lego. Everybody is familiar with Lego. The Lego of my youth, not my youth, but in 1956 Lego, you bought a box and it had a bunch of 2x4 bricks, right? Two what are they called? Nibs, dots, whatever, by 4. So you had a bunch of those, and you had 2x2. And so you could build a wall, you could build a house. They came in 3 colors. You had to be really creative to do anything that interesting, but it was fun. Within about 10 years, they started selling wheels. Now you can make cars, and there were little roof slanty things, so you could put a slanty roof on your house. And then everything started to fall apart when they started making people. And today, you buy a Lego set, and it's literally Darth Vader, and there's 2 pieces, top of Darth Vader, bottom of Darth Vader. And that's a Lego set today. And that's fine, but what if you say, I want Darth Vader to be wearing a white uniform with angel wings? And it's you can't have that. No. Whereas with the original Lego, it was limited to your creativity. You would just put 2 extra 2x4 bricks, and those were angel wings. So one of the things that you see happening is that we're using these higher and higher level tools, but then again, we get much less flexibility with them, but much more power, and that's this big change in programming. And one of the differences is that when you have that requirement of angel wings for Darth Vader, for example, it's really tough to figure out how to do it because you did not learn anything about making models. Mm-hmm. You don't know how to create Darth Vader in the first place, so you don't know how those tools work, you're just using them. And that's why Stack Overflow became so important, and that's why everybody uses Stack Overflow all day long, because they're on there asking how to attach angel wings to Darth Vader. They don't know anything about, they don't even know who Darth Vader is. Their boss told them that morning, go make angel Darth Vader, or the software equivalent.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. So recently, Stack Overflow has been publishing a report, a developer study, I think.
Developer survey, yeah.
So that's the 6th one, asking 56,000
users,
people about their income, their professional life, their personal preferences. Is there any answers in there that really surprised you?
I don't know if there's anything that dramatically surprised me. I mean, the first thing that surprised me is it's unheard of to get that many answers to a survey. That's an enormous amount of participation. So anybody that participated, thank you very much. And we actually look at the Stack Overflow data, so to speak, as having two dimensions. The survey is there to just kind of ask questions and figure out the framework of how we might want to study our users. But we also have individual row-level data on individual hits on Stack Overflow from individual users, and we know things like IP address, but also what question they're looking at. And we can tell you, approximately what level their skills are at, and whether they're. We have a really good machine learning algorithm that can tell you based on visiting one page on Stack Overflow whether you're a web developer, a full stack web developer, Android developer, iOS developer. Like that stuff seems pretty easy. You could look at the tags, but we do it a little bit more broadly. And right now we're doing it mostly so that we can show you appropriate job listings on the side in the sidebar. But the data that we have on developers visiting the site reflects 45 million developers. 16 million of them are professional developers. And we know that from labor statistics that governments publish. The other people, the rest of the 45 million, are not professional programmers. They may be learning, they may be doing some programming on the side, but they don't describe it as their job. And we have kind of very, very, very detailed information on where they live, where they work during the day, where they work at night, what technologies they use, what technologies they're learning, what technologies they're learning at night when they go home, what the difference is, who lives how far away from work. Things that we can figure out just from kind of that raw data. And that stuff is extremely useful. And so we have a whole business called Developer Insights, where companies that want to work with developers, hire developers, decide where to build a developer office, etc., can ask us to kind of look at that data.
Good. So basically, you use this data to improve the site, right?
Yeah, and actually, this is one small part of our business, but everything we do kind of benefits everybody. I mean, a typical report that we'll do will be an employer asking, that is trying to decide where to build their next office to hire programmers, and they want sort of statistics on how many programmers with what technologies are located where, and we can give them that data with a great deal of granularity, and we can even tell them you need to be in this neighborhood, and that's really useful, and it benefits developers because they did nothing, and now all of a sudden the world of jobs that is available to them will be better, their commutes will be shorter. So kind of everything that we do on Stack Overflow is symbiotic. All the things that we're doing for the people that pay us money are actually helping the developers on the site.
I see. How do you turn a good developer into a great developer?
I was hoping you would ask the opposite question. How do you make a good developer bad? And I was going to say,
a 10x developer.
It's very easy. You put them in an office with these rows of tables where they sit side by side at their computer in a big, noisy, open office space, and you can make any good developer into a bad developer in 5 minutes. How do you make them into a great developer? That I actually, I'm still a pretty strong believer that there is a certain type of thinking that is required for great developers. And the type of thinking is the ability. Let me take a drink while I figure out my answer. The ability to think at two different levels of abstraction at the same time is, to me, the hallmark of a good developer. And two ways you will identify that is, number one, being really good with pointers in C. Which requires you often to think of pointers to pointers, and this is thinking about where the thing is allocated and whether you've actually passed by value or passed by reference, that kind of stuff, which gives everybody a headache. I know that it's hard to learn because a lot of people's brains blow up, and they either eventually figure it out or sometimes they don't. And the jury is still out on whether that can be taught to all people or whether you need to be born with a certain part of your brain to learn that. The other way you'll see it is in understanding recursion, people that understand recursive programming. Now, these two skills, pointers and recursion, are not used by most working developers most of the time today. They're just not needed anymore. We're working at high-level languages that don't have pointers. They might have pass by value and pass by reference, or some concept of that, or that may not even be relevant because they just think of everything as being, I don't know. Why don't you just convert it to a big JSON object and throw that on? I have not programmed a lot in JavaScript, and I recently had to program in JavaScript, and I was like, okay, whatever, it's like Java, I can figure this out. And And I was wondering, in a browser, how do you do a deep copy of an object? I needed a deep copy of an object. And that's all I knew, really. And so I just Googled deep copy of an object, and I got Stack Overflow, of course. And do you know how to do this? Like, the most efficient way is to convert it to JSON and then convert it back to another object. And, like, in my day, that's like string, parsing, lexing. That sounds horrible. That sounds unbelievably inefficient. That could not possibly be the right answer. How is there no way to do deep copy other than, like, literally converting the thing? Like, what we used to call marshalling and unmarshalling, which is computationally absurd. So I guess that's what the kids do today, and they don't care. Anyway, what were we talking about? Oh, different levels of abstraction. So you don't really need to understand pass by reference. And what people do, I guess, is they just make a big JSON object and pass that. If they can't figure out why the thing is passing by reference when it's supposed to be passing by value. And good for them. However, this is still a thing, I think, that reflects kind of an ability to really understand algorithms, to use algorithms correctly, and to be a really great developer. And I think that's something everybody should try to learn and should work on. Like, at least in one area, even though we are just taking the big Darth Vader pieces and snapping them together today, and that's the main thing that we do, and you don't have to know why it works, and you don't have to care that it's god-awfully slow. It's still the case that if you could just at least do one pet project where you get all the way down to machine language and learn that thing, I think that's a valuable part of the mindset of a good developer.
Right. But I guess also, like, Stack Overflow is a bit like guilty in having, like, people not really getting into a book and, like, trying
because we make it possible essentially to just sort of surf on the top of that knowledge and programming through cut and paste programming. Right. But I mean, the benefit of that is that we've got some amazing things that exist that never would have existed. I mean, 95% of what's in the App Store, like, for example, when I got my puppy, I thought it was really important to keep track of when my puppy went to the bathroom. And in the old days, you would get an Access database, right? And you'd have to make your own database. But in the new days, you go to the App Store and you're like, puppy, bathroom, whatever, and you find there are 30 or 40 different choices for applications that are a database that keep track of when your puppy goes to the bathroom. And they don't have to be that good. They only have to, I mean, it's not a hard problem. And I'm thinking probably most of these applications were not written by professional programmers. These people do not know recursion and pointers. They literally copied and pasted everything from Stack Overflow, and their app has every possible user interface bug and usability bug that it could possibly have. But it does actually solve the problem that I need to solve in a way that I never would have had access to that thing before. Mm-hmm. I need a better example than that one, I think. That sounds too trivial. That sounds trivial. There are actually really good examples. Twitter is a really good example. Grindr a really good example. These are large-scale applications used by millions of people on a daily basis with enormous amounts of engagement, meaning the number of hours that people use these applications is insane. And the reason I picked those two is they were never, like, no true developer ever touched the source code of those things. Twitter was eventually fixed, but like the first 3 years, Grindr to this day crashes every 10 seconds. But it's okay because they're literally changing the world, and they're changing the world, and they were created by, like, really amateurish programmers that slapped something together and just could never really make it, like, robust. It always needed too many servers. It was always crashing for days and days at a time. Failwell was something that everybody used to talk about in regards to Twitter, and it was okay because they're literally making the world substantially. I don't want to say better or worse. Different. They're changing the world. And they're impacting millions of people's lives, obviously in a way that those people have judged to be valuable and beneficial. And some of the most influential, world-changing apps did that, not having been written by professionals and having been written in the most awful possible way and crashing a lot on the way to getting there, and probably a lot of Stack Overflow copying and pasting.
Right. Well, the failware is more, we don't see it anymore so often. So
Twitter finally had to, they had to rewrite everything, and now it's okay.
Found some good engineers at some point.
Yeah, they did finally. But I mean, Twitter got valuable long before they fixed that problem.
Yeah, totally.
And we only knew about that problem because Twitter was so valuable to everybody. Yeah.
So I hear every day, like, companies are trying to hire developers. I think it's a really common problem of a lot of people. what are the, what does it take for a company to attract and keep talented developers these days?
Attract and keep talented developers. That's pretty tough, actually, and it's sort of hard to answer that question because I think every developer and every company is different, and finding compatibility between the company and the developer is how you're going to attract and maintain developers. And there's no real one answer. I think of it again. It sort of reminds me of dating sites, which is just sort of saying like, how should I find the best partner ever? Is not a real question. There's no single answer. It's finding the person that's compatible with you, the person that actually likes the things that are weird about you and doesn't like the things that you don't have, and vice versa. And I think it's the same thing, with developers. Somebody that wants to work for a company that is in the fashion industry, you should look for developers that care about fashion. And that may be a weird niche because most developers wouldn't know fashion if it bit them on the head.
We actually have a lot of developers who don't care about fashion.
Yeah, but they do. They exist, or they're people whose partners care about fashion, or they're people that actually kind of get excited by the concept or understand the concept, and they're always going to be more interested in continuing to work here and to sticking around. And so that's start with that. Be true to what you actually are. Every company has its own unique engineering problems, I think, and so a lot of people like to work on problems that are just enormous scale. A lot of people like to work on particular technologies that you may be working with that don't exist at other companies, and figuring out what makes you special and unique, and then figuring out what kind of developer is interested in that type of thing, and then targeting that exact type of developer and reaching that exact level of compatibility. And if you're not doing that, if you just sort of think, oh my God, I need a room full of JavaScript people, let's put out an ad and get all the JavaScript people. Without that, if you're not doing the right targeting, it's going to end up being a very frustrating process. And even the people you hire will not last very long.
Right. So let's focus a bit on the future. You founded two big companies that really changed the world, Trello and Stack Overflow. How do you decide to work on a project where you mentioned that it's something that kind of keep you awake at night?
Yeah.
But then what's next?
What's next? I'm not really sure. Past Hyperdev, we could talk about Hyperdev for a while because that's really sort of the next thing that Fog Creek is doing, and it's sort of too early to tell whether that works. Has anybody, just raise your hand if you've seen Hyperdev at all? That's cool. There's actually a few people that have seen it. For the rest of you, it's supposed to be a very simple programming environment. It's great for learning. It's great for quick and dirty code. It's great for, I just want to try something out. It's great for, I just want to share some code with somebody else. And it eliminates all of the administration around creating code. So today, if you want to get a website up and running with code on the server, code on the client, HTML and CSS, you need to figure out where you're going to get your domain name. You need to figure out who's going to host it. Right. You need to set up DNS. You need to set up hosting. You need to set up probably GitHub. You need to check your code into GitHub. You might have to get an account on GitHub if you want your code to be private. You might have to learn how to use GitHub in order to get. You have to figure out how to do deployment. You have to figure out how you're going to deploy the things. Maybe you're going to use FTP. Maybe there's some other deploy script. Maybe you need continuous integration. Let's use Circle CI. There's a lot of nonsense like that has nothing to do with the code that you wanted to write. Right. And Hyperdev is meant to just make that all disappear and just pick good defaults. And by defaults, I mean we're not using Git here. There's actually Git on the back end, but we're not exposing that to you in any way. We're giving you version control of the style of Google Docs, which is you can go back in time, there's unlimited undo, and the way that you collaborate with somebody else is you both work on the same file at the same time. The way we eliminate the whole deployment thing is every time you hit a keystroke, we deploy. Made a change, it's deployed, literally. And we can do that in, our target is 200 milliseconds right now. So literally as you're typing, we're deploying what you type. And if that means that you just forgot a semicolon, and so now your website doesn't work, that's what happens. So it's not great. But if you have a project that doesn't sound like a limitation, it's well, no, I just need to make a thing so that my parents can coordinate the whatever, then you don't care, then that's the right environment for you.
So you basically, lowers the barrier of entry to be a developer.
If you go to hyperdev.com, you already have a server running in the cloud, virtual, but it's a server. That's your server. You have a URL. Anybody can go to that URL, it'll work. You have a browser with source code. The source code is already running. And as you type changes to the source code, they are already being deployed. And what is showing in the browser is already refreshing and showing you the new thing. Right. So like every step of the process just sort of happens with zero configuration, zero setup, zero make an account. You never have to learn Git. So it's ideal for people that really want to focus on the programming right now. And later I will deal with the administration bullshit kind of around it.
Pretty
Sorry,
cool.
are we allowed to say that here?
So check it out. Hyperdev. You blog, you write books. You wrote 5 books.
Yeah, one of them was just editing, so I don't take credit for that.
You created a bunch of companies. One question I have is like, how do you manage your focus and time?
Yeah, a lot of delegation, so just getting other people to do things. So we have this amazing style of management called servant leadership, where we delegate all the responsibility to the people that are going to actually do it. And if I ever find that I have to do something at work, then that's a sign that I need to hire somebody and delegate that task to somebody else. If I find that there's email sitting in my inbox for too long, that's a sign that I haven't forwarded it to somebody to deal with. We have a rule at all my companies that if I forward you email without any words, then just pretend you got the email. And if you want to reply, just say, Joel asked me to reply. And if you don't want to reply, just don't reply. So then I can just forward everything to somebody else to do.
Okay, that's...
Yeah. And I never work on weekends.
Sorry?
I never work on weekends.
Okay.
Very rarely do any work on weekends.
Wow. What trends, tool, and like development techniques do you see in the tech industry? What do you find exciting as well?
And Hyperdev is super exciting. And
this one looks really
let me think about
exciting.
That. Actually, I mean, what I find exciting actually is the very simple tools for remote collaboration. And it's essentially Slack is so much better than IRC that you don't even notice how what a difference it is to move from kind of a basic chat system to a decent design, comprehensive chat system. Things like video conferencing, which is now very easy to have a video conference with 15 people for free on Google Hangouts. You can use the paid things like Zoom and have like 65 people in a room or 100 people. And that makes working with a remote team much better. It means you can build a team of people, of the best people in the world. They don't necessarily all have to be in your city.
Is there any technologies you see having like a really huge impact on humankind in the next 5 years? Wow.
I'm going to get this wrong. I can't. The funny thing is, if you ask me what technologies in the last 5 years have had a huge impact on mankind, I think I might have trouble even knowing what the heck happened in the past, let alone predicting what will happen in the future. So I'm going to pass on that one. Everybody else is going to say self-driving cars. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess
maybe?
Like machine learning generally is... Like
machine learning, yeah, it's already been there and done that. Bitcoin, no.
Blockchain.
No. I don't know, they all sound terrible to me. But, I thought Facebook sounded terrible and it had a big impact, as it turns
out. Last question. What kind of future do you see for Stack Overflow? What are the next big steps for Stack Overflow?
The next big challenges. I can tell what's going to happen tomorrow. Not quite tomorrow, but in the next few days, you'll see the beta of Stack Overflow documentation. That's kind of a big deal because what we want to do for documentation on the internet, developer documentation, what we did for Q&A, which is get it all in one place, create a reputation system around it, create a gamification system so people use all their extra energy to create awesome crowdsourced documentation, and just make the world of the official documentation massively better through the techniques that made Stack Overflow successful.
So exciting.
So that's pretty exciting. For Hyperdev, we're working on other languages besides JavaScript, which is good because you won't have to copy things to JSON when you want to. And Ruby and Python, that kind of stuff. Some other stuff, we're working on enhancing the developer profile. So your user profile on Stack Overflow, we want to enhance it with all kinds of career-oriented information and information about your success and identity and the things that you've built and the things that you're proud of and the things that you've written in your blog and all that kind of stuff. We want to get all that stuff in a structured way into your profile on Stack Overflow so that you can start to use that as a way of getting a job. And we think of it as being,
that's really cool.
Hopefully it's sort of like a developer LinkedIn,
yeah.
but without the cesspool of spam.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Big round of applause for Joel.
Thanks. Thank you. What a great crowd.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're going to take like a few questions. So whoever has a question, please go to the microphone over there so we can hear you. I'm actually noticing that the fire has a sound like this crackling.
Oh yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It has, and it's also warm.
Yep. Okay. This is going to be a little bit long one. I apologize for that. So we all know the JavaScript fatigue, that the JavaScript world, for example, changes so fast we cannot keep in touch and so on. And this is like the thing I've seen on the Stack Overflow several times. Like I'm going to ask a question about, I don't know, Angular 1.5. And it is all already answered about Angular 1.1, and I'm not supposed to ask the question once again. But the golden answer for Angular 1.1 is not what I'm seeking, because there is a best practice, or maybe the old one is not the answer I'm looking for. But also I'm not incentivized to answer it, because the golden answer is already there with a green check mark and everything like that. What is the Stack Overflow plan to address that? Like the answer rot.
That is one of the things we're working on, and it's usually a situation where if somebody's asked a question, the number one answer does not appear to be the right one. There's another answer rapidly gaining votes a little bit below the number one answer, and it's usually because something has changed in the technology or something has changed in the world, and it is a problem. It's not as big a problem as you see, because the number of questions that really have, when you see it, it's usually the number one answer has 7,000 votes. Or something kind of absurd. And the number of instances of that on Stack Overflow is very, very small. Like it's very visible when you see it, because these are really popular questions, and but it may be the kind of thing where somebody just has to go through and clean up 100 cases. I don't know if it's really a completely endemic problem. We have thought of various ideas like aging votes and stuff like that, or changing the sort algorithm. And it is a genuine problem, but it's not, like the scale of the problem is not as big as it might seem in statistical terms. There's always been an ability on Stack Overflow to edit answers. And so what we kind of hope will happen is that somebody responsible will come along and edit the first answer to say, this is, especially in cases where it's, these are rare, like if you point this out to me, I will edit it myself, but cases where the first answer is actually not safe. And then what I really want to see is like somebody edit that and put it in a header saying, even though this is the number one answer, this is not safe. See here, hyperlink, so that at least we can prevent damage. Sorry.
Is this what I'm supposed to do?
You can if you have enough reputation to edit answers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I have official permission.
Now, to be fair, there are cases where the world actually is utterly convinced that answer number 3 is better than answer number 1, and that is not, in fact, the consensus. So like I can't really get involved in that one. But if the consensus is that 3 is better than 1, you can also just ask about it on Meta, and a moderator can go in there and adjust it. I mean, they could literally delete the first answer if it's no longer safe or no longer good practice. So we do want to fix all those things, and we think of the body of knowledge on Stack Overflow as being like a wiki that has to get better and better and better. And we do want to fix every instance where it's wrong. And that's, if you bring it up on Meta, somebody may be able to help in certain instances. But But one other thing, I mean, when you're thinking about like the old answer and the new answer, and the old answer works, but it's not the best way of doing things and stuff like that, that sometimes that's just a limitation of crowdsourcing, which is the best that crowdsourcing can ever do is reflect what the crowd believes to be true. And if the crowd is wrong and you can't convince them, then the crowdsourced corpus, the body created by the crowdsourcers, will reflect their wrong knowledge. And in fact, Wikipedia will do this all the time, continue to reflect wrong knowledge, if that's the consensus.
Hi there, I have a question about the Joel test. So I was wondering, how well do you think does the Joel test stand the test of time?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, like, everyone is using version control systems right now, and I think that question maybe is kind of like maybe on the list of being deprecated.
I mean, people still tell me that they have worked at companies that currently get 2 on the Joel test. So I think you might be optimistic as to how widespread some of those practices are. There's a couple of things that they clearly show their age. My favorite is do a daily build, and the best teams today always have some kind of continuous integration process. So that's sort of the new norm, is continuous integration, not just daily builds. The Joel test was never meant to be dictating a specific way of working. It had a much more modest goal. The goal was, I have a software team, and I need to evaluate very quickly if they're doing kind of professional work or basically non-professional work. And so as a barometer or a thermometer of, is this a professional development team, it's still pretty good, even if all 12 of those things aren't super up to date, and maybe we're missing a couple of new things and not having a couple. I mean, the Joel test is, a moment in time. It's not like it's actively maintained by me in any particular way, but I think it does work pretty well. There's certain things people will sometimes say, hey, how come you don't have 100% TDD coverage as a requirement for the Joel test? And that's because I don't agree with 100% TDD coverage. I don't think that's a sign of a good development team necessarily. It's not necessarily bad, but usually it's just a sign of psychological disorders. Sorry. It can be, maybe you need it. I don't know. A lot of the things that people have proposed that I add are not really necessarily such good practices.
Hello. I love the careers iteration that's happening right now, and I'm wondering if you're planning to do any more support for freelance work.
We're definitely continuously iterating over careers. Freelance work is just sort of a different beast, and we want to get to that eventually, but it's not our primary focus right now at this exact moment. And when I think about online freelance work, the one thing that we want to support is we really do want to be the not shitty LinkedIn for developers, where it's not spam and you can actually show your work and show what you know. And as such, I think that will be useful to people that want to hire developers and people that want to work as developers. Like, I would want a freelancer to keep their profile on Stack Overflow. I want that to be the best place to have your profile. And if you're looking for freelancers, I want you to evaluate them based on their Stack Overflow profile as kind of the first place you look to see who they are, rather than something like LinkedIn, which is not optimized for that purpose. On the other hand, there's this other world of Odesk and Elance and those other sort of traditional, like, get Fiverr, sites where it's like pay $5 and get some crappy code that somebody generated, I don't know where, cut and pasted. And that's sort of a different world, and it's not something that we've ever focused on or worked on very hard.
We take 2 more questions.
Hello. How would you do it if you had to start Stack Overflow today from scratch?
Yes, there would be another 2 zeros on the end of your reputation score. So it would just be when it prints your reputation score, like the format string, it'd just be extra 2 zeros at the end. And I'm not joking, actually. I would seriously do this because there's an actual measurable scientific result that shows that when somebody hits 1 million points in any system, their loyalty to the system goes up by about 10%,
Interesting.
or their incentive to stick with the system. A passenger that has flown 1 million miles over their lifetime on one airline is 10% more likely to stick with that airline than a passenger that has flown 999,999 miles. And it doesn't matter if it's miles or dollars or points or anything stupid. It just has to be at 1 million just to have. And so I would stick those 2 zeros on there. Now we can't do that. Everybody would think that was inflation. They'd be furious. So it's too late. And one person will finally hit 1 million, which is John Skeet will eventually hit 1 million, but it's tough. Actually, there's a second thing I would change, which it's also too late to change right now about Stack Overflow, which is the comments. I would make the comments disappear after 7 days. And that was always sort of the intent, is that the comment is for discussing the question. And the trouble is people put knowledge into the comments.
Right.
And we don't want knowledge there where it can't be voted properly, it doesn't show up properly. We want the comments to be meta for the question and the answers. And we want you to be forced, and especially the worst thing which I've ever seen, which is answering a question with a comment where it's useless, it doesn't get voted on, and people are just like, oh, I don't need the reputation, and I'm not even sure if this is right. And that's a very, very bad use of a comment, in my opinion. And if we just told everybody ahead of time the comments will disappear after 7 days, they would use the comments only for ephemeral things. It would be the Snapchat of the internet, of programmer Q&A. And then the answers would remain for the long term. And I still think that would work, but we can't do that retroactively because there's too much knowledge in the comments. There's too much important stuff in the comments for that to go away.
But the point you could multiply everyone by.
Yeah, they would revolt. They would say, "What is this, Zimbabwe?"
Right.
Hi. So my question is, so what are careers and Stack Overflow? So definitely people who go there to hire developers, they check like the reputation. And imagine if you would be a hiring person who would go there and see the reputation. So would you basically, do you think it's okay to like hire a person based on the reputation just, or you would ask them to like invert binary trees or stuff? So
okay, so let me give you 2 qualifications. One is if you were a hiring manager and you only wanted to hire people based on high reputation on Stack Overflow, you would not find enough people. So just to warn you ahead of time, a lot of the people that you're going to be evaluating do not have a sufficient reputation on Stack Overflow to make a decision based on their reputation score. And secondly, the raw number of reputation I don't think is really that useful. I think what's useful actually is reading the work. And so a lot of times, when I'm evaluating a candidate for a position and they've attached their Stack Overflow profile, I'll go to their profile and I'll just read the last 5 answers that they wrote. And I'll actually just read the words of the answers, and I'll look at the kinds of questions they've asked, the kinds of questions. And it's a 5-minute project, and for me as a programmer, I will immediately have a sense of that person as a programmer. I'll have a sense of whether they're a real programmer or a poser, whether they're a beginner or an advanced programmer. And from my experience, and this is after 20 years, or 20, I don't even want to say the number, a lot of years of interviewing and hiring programmers, the confidence that I get from reading somebody's work on Stack Overflow is sort of the equivalent of like 4 actual interviews. And I still want to meet the person, and I would still want to do the last final interview to make sure that they're not an axe murderer and that they're not really, really, really weird in a way that I cannot live with, but which sometimes happens. And, not that often, but if I could just read their answers, I get just a lot of confidence about their knowledge as a Stack Overflow developer. I actually had a situation where I don't want to go into too much detail because this is an actual human being here. But I was considering hiring a particular programmer, and the person had gone through the interviewing process and done pretty well, and we had mostly decided to hire them. But at the last minute, one of the interviewers said, I don't like this candidate, I don't want to hire them. And I completely disagreed with that interviewer's assessment of not wanting to hire this person, just based on some Stack Overflow answers. And I actually went to that hiring manager and I said, let's just look at this answer and look at this answer and look at this answer. There is no way that is not a strong programmer. And he was saying, I don't think this person really knows this. I don't think he's really that good at that. And I said, how could he write that answer if he wasn't good at this and wasn't good at that? And he sort of read them and said, you know what, I agree with you, you're right. So, you can make a really, really good case for yourself through, writing thoughtful answers on Stack Overflow. It doesn't have to be a high reputation. It just has to be, 3 great answers. And that's really what it takes. So the number one thing is that the number is not that important. What's important is that you have some written words on Stack Overflow that we can assess, and it is a really, really strong signal. It's so much stronger than anything you'll ever find on LinkedIn.
Thank you. I have a last question for you. What is your favorite development stack?
My favorite development stack is VBA and Excel. Thank you very much. You've been a great crowd.
All right.
Good.
Thank you, Joel.
Thanks again.
All right. So we are going to take a short break, and then we will have Nicolas from Udacity and a student also from Udacity coming on stage. Nicolas, do you want to say more about your speech, upcoming speech?
Sure, thanks, Johann. Fun fact about Johann, we approached him today only that he's actually going to be moderating to talk to. Thanks for taking that one in a short notice. But we figured it makes much more sense to have you doing it since you have a technical background, actually.
Thank you.
So what's on still tonight is I recommend to get a refreshment. Everyone, fresh Cokes or drinks or like beer and stuff. We also have some pizza delivered. The first set of pizzas is already there. There's going to be a couple of more deliveries. I urge you people to try to behave. I don't want to have fights around the beer. We will meet again in 15 to 20 minutes after everyone's got a refreshment, I would say. See you soon, guys.
Thank you.